Hi guys, so today we're going to talk about something that's quite hard to put your finger on and quite hard to teach students and define for them, and that is things like conclusions, evaluations and judgments. So let's get into that. Right, so I think the problem is that I've never really sat down to give concrete definitions to something that I inherently understand. And so for we English teachers, we can summarize, we can conclude, we can evaluate, we can judge, and they sort of come all together when we're doing it for ourselves. We sort of do these things intuitively and all at once. But to explain that to students is actually quite hard. So each has to be broken down. So I've finally done that. There are two other things that always annoyed me when I was discussing this or trying to think about how I could explain this to students. The first thing is aligning it with levels of thinking, so low, medium, high level thinking, and also aligning these skills with the way I like to teach reading, which is like identifying, talking about the effects of language and structure, but also reading on the lines, between the lines, beyond the lines, and behind the lines. So finally, I have done that, and I have found some concrete definitions about what these things are. So let's get into that. First of all, summarizing. Now, before I looked into all of this, I didn't realize, or I didn't appreciate that summarizing was a really important part of scaffolding students into further critical thinking. I sort of associated it, I guess, with, there were two aspects to this. First, I associated it with sort of retelling, which they do at primary school. So why am I doing it now? Which is a really stupid way of thinking, because it is a vital part of the reading process. And by the way, when I'm talking about reading here, I'm also talking about, listening to podcasts or viewing films and things as well. But I'll use the word reading. So the other thing is that I think at high school, for me anyway, I'm always in a rush to get students busy with annotating. So finding those language and structural techniques, making a note of the effects on the text itself, and maybe pulling out a few lines here and there and sort of making a note of meanings. So I rush to annotate, but actually they need to just get the gist and to summarize. So I've been missing out on that. So that's a little tip there. So summarizing is a good first step. In fact, it's a vital first step. Summarizing is about looking for the key ideas. It's about easy information transfer. So basically copying some things, or students can paraphrase. One moment, please. Just got to scroll my notes. And also, of course, it's low-level thinking involved there. And in terms of aligning it with reading on, between, beyond, etc., the lines, this is definite just reading on the lines stuff. So it's low level, however, it is very important. Okay, the second phase is drawing conclusions. And yes, I know we should really say concluding, but we never do. And I know for us New Zealand teachers, NZQA talks about drawing conclusions rather than concluding. So let's run with that. Okay, so conclusions is about looking at the evidence in the text and seeing what story it tells. Now, I think you could start by just defining that, and even for the seniors, like let's pare it back and start again. So you could use a science example. So for example, sugar, the teaspoon of sugar dissolved in the water, I can draw the conclusion that sugar is soluble. Look at me, cross-curricular. Another one, you could look at forensic science, okay? Have a bit of fun And the example I've got in my blog is Sally's fingerprints were on the knife and the cake tin. The conclusion I draw from this is that Sally is the one who ate all the cake. So if you start with very simple examples and tell the students it's about telling a story, taking the evidence and forming a story from that, that's a really good way to introduce conclusions. So this involves medium level thinking, I'm going to say, and it's the equivalent of, I guess, reading between the lines. Righto, so far we've got summarizing, and then we've got drawing conclusions, and in line with drawing conclusions is synthesizing. Synthesizing is simply drawing conclusions, but from multiple texts, not just one text. So you're looking at a whole lot of text, and from that you are able to tell your story. Classic example would be you've got 3 film reviews and they're all absolutely glowing about this film. Ergo, the conclusion that you can draw is that this film is fantastic and well worth going to see. So that's a nice little example that you could easily give to students there to talk about synthesizing. Now, seniors synthesize all the time when they're looking at connections across text, when they're doing research and synthesizing. So yeah, thinking critically about what they found across that range. So synthesizing is a really key thing for them to understand. Have a look at my blog because I've got another example there. Okay, now one of the other things that confused me about all of this thinking was the other words that we tap into for to describe this thinking. So we've got summarizing, we've got drawing conclusions, we've got evaluating, and we've got making judgments. But what about those words like interpreting, analyzing, and so on? With synthesizing, drawing conclusions, we can use the words inferring or inferencing, interpreting, analyzing, explaining. They're all part of that. So don't freak out. Tell the students, hey, we use words interchangeably. Don't get too hung up on it. I've got a freebie that outlines the basics. So these 4 basic steps, the summarizing, concluding, evaluating, and judging. So that might help. So long as they understand those concepts, that's what you want. Evaluating and making judgments are the 2 things that I find really difficult to define for students, and even myself actually, until I read that evaluating is a positive process and making judgments is a negative process. So that's something to keep in mind, an easy way to remember the 2. Evaluating is looking at things like the pros and the cons, making connections and so on. So it's relatively objective. An example could be, here's one I prepared earlier. This excerpt seems to be set in our own time, suggesting chivalry and achievement in young people is not a thing of the past, as many of the older generation often suggest. Now, you might like to break evaluation up into 3 parts for your students. They can evaluate meanings, so ideas. They can evaluate techniques and their effects, or they can evaluate the creator. So have a play around with that. It works sometimes. For other texts it doesn't. It does depend on the text. And of course, if you've got a student that is just a gun with critical thinking, breaking it down can actually be a bit problematic, because I know that when I evaluate, I throw all of that in and I'm throwing judgments in all together as I think. But we are breaking it down, we are scaffolding the students through so that they have a good understanding of these skills before we let them go for gold, right? So that's the way of doing it. So remember, evaluation is a positive process. It involves being objective. It's about formulating a discussion, which is what our senior students do. Of course, it's high-level thinking, and it involves reading beyond and behind, looking at that author, the creator, behind the lines. Fourth thing, judgments. Now, as I said before, judgments are a negative process. Think star ratings, think those mean judges holding up cards 1 to 10 to judge the gymnasts on the floor. Examples of judgments, blah, blah, blah. This text is probably worthwhile for young men to study because it shows them in a positive light and might in turn help them feel good about themselves. So that's a judgment, right? One little trick you could do is have students really push those personal pronouns in there. So I think, so it's giving their judgment. So yeah. So here's all the thinking that I've done about this. So as a result, I think I would rate this, go back to basics. I'd rate this a 5 out of 10 because I think this would be really inflammatory for a lot of people. So they're really judging it. They're giving it a rating. So remember, it's a negative process. It's judgy. So making judgments involves, as I said, a negative process, being subjective, making decisions, being judgy. Formulating an argument, that's the other word that we use for seniors. And obviously high-level thinking and reading beyond and behind the lines. So we're talking about inferencing again and interpreting, but this time it's arguing. So evaluating is more discussion, judging is more arguing, being judgy. So let's just recap. Summarizing is about retelling. Concluding, drawing conclusions, is about looking at the evidence and seeing what story it tells. Synthesizing is about drawing conclusions as well, but across multiple texts. Evaluating is a positive process that involves discussion. And judging is a negative process, being judgy, that involves arguing. Hope that helps, clarifies things a bit. Enjoy.